Good afternoon and welcome to an event to which I have long been looking forward. It's a pleasure to be standing here and an honor to be in the company of such an august group of cultural diplomats. I flew here from London, a city with so many similarities to Berlin, which has been in the news for good and bad reasons in the past few days. You will be aware of the trial of two men charged with the murder of Fusilier Lee Rigby in Woolwich last summer. And last week, at the Old Bailey, Michael Adebolajo, one of the defendants, explained his actions thus: "I am a soldier of Allah and this is a war." A week earlier, at their North Club Stadium, Arsenal Football Club, which was formed in Woolwich, hosted a league game against Hull City. Their first goal was scored by a Dane. Their second was scored by Mesut Ozil, a nationalized German from a family of Turkish refugees, and at one stage, 60,000 fans inside the stadium sung Ozil's name. Hull City's best chance was squandered by Yannick Sagbo, born in the Ivory Coast, brought up in France, and living in the northeast of England. These two events demonstrate the polar extremes of cultural influence. On one hand, we see nations, religions, and cultures brought together through the commonality of sport. On the other, we witness a man from a peaceful British family indoctrinated by extremist groups at university and turning to the most abhorrent form of violence in the name of religion. A religion followed by many millions of law-abiding, liberal, and progressive people around the world, but whose very identity is being tarnished by a minority of fundamentalists. This polarization presents the context for everything we will discuss. Because at the heart of our subject lies a paradox. Because culture is a catalyst for good and evil. And it's our challenge and the challenge of every liberal-minded individual across the world to cement and develop its role as a force for good. And if any city in the world has been affected by the good and evil that culture can bring, that city is Berlin. The events of the 1930s and 1940s do not require any introduction from me. They shaped 20th century's history in the most tragic way. And they proved how, when controlled by hard power, music, art, cinema, theater, religion, and sport can all be manipulated in terrible directions. Fortunately, the past 70 years have seen soft power come to the fore here. The spirit of the 17th century Enlightenment has been reborn, and Berlin has once again been lauded for its policies on immigration and religious tolerance. The majority of Berliners now claim to have no affiliations to any religion, but within it, Muslims, Jews, Catholics, and Protestants live together. The Jewish story is perhaps the most poignant. Many tens of thousands of Jews now live here, setting up new communities, establishing synagogues, and integrating seamlessly with the multicultural environment around them. If good news created headlines, this is a story that would run and run. In and around this interfaith acceptance lies a city described by David Bowie as the greatest cultural extravaganza that one could imagine. And to illustrate just how apt that description is, I'd like to mention just 3 local events. The first, a public-private partnership, took place back in October. It was called Professional Strategic Communications Training to prepare and empower Muslim community leaders to counter extremism and to promote interfaith understanding. The title may be a mouthful, but its 2 intentions were clear and progressive. The first was to empower peaceful messaging to drown out extremism using strategic communication tools on mainstream and social media platforms, reaching general audiences as well as youth elements within the Muslim communities. The second was to promote interfaith dialogue and build bridges of mutual understanding to support local integration goals, bringing together local Muslim leaders with other stakeholders. The second event takes place this coming weekend. It is the Louis Lewandowski Music Festival. Lewandowski was a 19th century German Jewish composer who spent most of his life in Berlin. His work modernized the Jewish liturgy by creating new harmonies to accompany the religious ceremonies. In the process, he made Jewish synagogue music popular all over the world. At this weekend's festival, the core ensemble will be supported by choirs from Europe, Asia, and Africa. Concerts will be held in synagogues, churches, and other cultural institutions. Both will be attended by different groups at different times and with different priorities. But both are perfect examples of the approach being advocated at the third event, which is our own, taking place here this week. Our primary goal is to review and analyze the progress during the last year in the areas of cultural diplomacy, cross-continental cooperation and democracy promotion, successful peace building and reconciliation, human rights, multiculturalism, and harmonious international relations. Cultural relations refers to the sharing of soft activities in achieving these goals. And it is truly inspiring to see that the entertainment taking place here around our more formal agenda illustrates that the ICD is not just talking the talk, but simultaneously walking the walk. And tomorrow evening, This Is Our Planet concert is in honor of the victims of Typhoon Haiyan. It has been organized in conjunction with UNICEF and Berlin's Filipino community. On Thursday, Marcia Barrett will be presenting The Strength of Song, illustrating music's ability to transcend borders and bring people together, irrespective of the political, social, or cultural context. When I last spoke here, I mentioned Daniel Berenbaum and Edward Said's East-West Divan Orchestra, which is just one high-profile example of music's soft power. The goodwill messages of the US jazz ambassadors during the Cold War, the campus songs of the anti-Vietnam protest movement, the sounds of Miriam Makeba during South African apartheid, and the songs of Scorpion promoting East-West German reunification in the immediate period prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Each has its own way, had a positive effect on modern history in areas where politicians and hard power had failed. Only yesterday, on my way to the airport, I heard a taxi driver playing Bob Dylan's Blowing in the Wind. Its last verses include the words, "How many years can a people exist before they're allowed to be free?" It is impossible to measure its direct influence on the civil rights movement, but there can be no doubt that it played a significant role. Marcia was previously in the German band Boney M., one of the first mainstream Western acts allowed behind the Iron Curtain during the 1970s. She has a long and impressive record of music in the name of peace. This included No War and Peace and Love, with proceeds going to the War Child Charity Organization for Children in War Zones. I know how much we all are looking forward to both events, amidst the awareness that they are not just to be enjoyed in there and now, but for what they represent symbolically in terms of our greater goal. Our subject has this year been the subject of a detailed report by John Holden of the think tank Demos in the British Council. It's called Influence and Attraction, Culture and the Race for Soft Power in the 21st Century. And it focuses on the growing awareness of the relevance and potential impact of cultural relations. It demonstrates how expenditure is increasing in this area, but with a return on investments already being gleaned through tourism and trade. There has been immeasurable growth in this area in the world's fastest developing nations, including the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and also more widely across Asia and the Middle East. This global appreciation of the work at the heart of the ICD is particularly resonant for me and the Iman Foundation, which I chair. The foundation was launched 2.5 years ago to promote interfaith and intercultural dialogue and to challenge extremism across the world. Our goals are ambitious. We campaign incessantly against those who promote hatred, violence, and killing. And in the process, we have attracted support from high-profile religious and political leaders from across the globe. I have had the great privilege of traveling far and wide to meet many of them to discuss the measures we can take to counter the growing evil of religious extremism. They include the leaders of the Coptic Orthodox Church of Egypt, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, the Lebanese Patriarch, the Mufti of Lebanon, the president of the Jewish community in Berlin, the leader of the Protestant church here in Germany, and the head monk of the Yonghegong Lama Temple in Beijing. They represent very different creeds, but they share a set of values. Each appreciates that no faith can flourish in isolation, and that segregation accelerates misunderstanding and suspicion, which in turn can fuel violence. As a result, they have all supported Iman's campaigns launched in 2011 to say no to extremism and sectarianism, because they understand that the world can only benefit from greater levels of tolerance and harmony. And experience demonstrates that when Iman and the ICD work together, we make a great team. I have no doubt that great progress will be made this week. But despite the many examples of successful cultural diplomacy upon which we will focus, we must not allow ourselves to be distracted from the huge amount of work still to be done. Religion has never presented such a threat to global peace and harmony. As a Syrian living in exile from my native country for many years, I'm all too aware of the growing threat of Islamic extremism. Syria is, of course, now in the grip of a civil war being fought between a tyrannical regime and a collection of rebel Islamist groups of various denominations. But the fundamentalist cancer spreads much further, evidenced by the well-publicized atrocities in Kenya and Nigeria, the latest acts of terrorism in Algeria, Mali, and Libya, the sectarian conflicts in Lebanon and Iraq, and the extremist enclaves in Russian Chechnya and China's Xinjiang province. Groups like Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf, Al-Shabaab, the Turkestan Islamic Army, Al-Nusra, the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas have the power to destroy large parts of society. And in real terms, our role is not to combat those already committed to them, but to help influence their potential recruits by demonstrating the benefits of integration and mutuality. The causes of extremism are deep-rooted and complex. Cultural and diplomatic integration present the only way forward. They can help the world unite in the face of Islamic fundamentalism, which threatens us all directly or indirectly, from New York to Nairobi, London to Lagos, Mumbai to Moscow to Madrid, Boston to the Balkans, Indonesia to India, and China to Chad. It won't happen by chance or by waiting for others to take the lead. It requires us all to promote the values that unite us against the evil of Islamism. And those values are our humanity, our love for life, and our willingness to embrace it in conjunction with those of different backgrounds. Ultimately, we believe in a world that is here to be lived in and loved, rather than one in which violence is encouraged with the promise of rewards after death. It will take time, but our first fight is not just for the here and now, but to create a better, safer world for our children and our future generations. The good news is that although the world is beset by problems and the threat of extremism is all too real, we represent the majority. That majority is made up of people of all religion, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds, whose values are essentially liberal and who yearn for a more peaceful world. It is fact that the majority is often silent and forced to feel the effect of the noise created by those whose modus operandi is more sinister. Culture represents the opportunity to spread the very interests and qualities that appeal to the majority. Many millions listened to the music of Boney M at a time when diplomatic relations between East and West were frozen. Even at the very heart of the Middle East's troubles, the Yalla Young Leaders group has utilized social media to spread the word that the majority want peace and not conflict. Last year, I served the internet and was subsumed by wonderful example of cultural relations. In one heartwarming episode, relations between Ghana and Colombia were reported to have flourished after a joint musical collaboration on the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park in Accra. There is a huge appetite for this work, and never more so than in this symbolic period, as we celebrate the life of Nelson Mandela. His very name is synonymous with peace and reconciliation, and his belief in the role of cultural assimilation was strong. He understood the role that sport could play in reuniting a fractured South Africa and the Rugby World Final Cup of 1995, when he presented the trophy to the white captain of the national side whilst wearing the Springbok shirt, was a moment that captured everything we stand for. As Holden's report puts it, Cultural diplomacy creates conditions for broad and deep cultural exchange to flourish, because peer-to-peer exchange is more likely to generate trust. Culture is not forced upon us from the state. It grows from the grassroots of society. It creates a very real sense of identity that is not restricted by geographical or religious boundaries. It is unquestionably a force for good, as demonstrated by this great city of Berlin, a living, breathing example of diplomacy and culture in action, which is why it provides such a perfect setting for this conference. I hope that every one of you has a fabulous few days, and that as a result of our work, the world will become safer, happier, and more harmonious. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.